Good morning. I'm Eleanor Hawkins, and welcome to Telestory Time. I have brought along Buddy Book again because he wanted to come to be on Telestory Time. You know, Buddy Book is this little book that has arms and legs and a big nose and eyes. And you can see his arms, and he really has red shoes. And inside he says, "Hello, I'm a book, and I'm your buddy. Laugh and sing. Play and share. Read and dream. Yes, I'm Buddy Book, and I'm here to listen to the stories this morning. And I'll put Buddy Book right over here. And I'll read you our very first story. You know, many of you boys and girls are learning to swim, and this is about a little girl who learns to swim. The name of the book is Jean Ellen Learns to Swim. Jean Ellen went down to the pond to learn to swim. Now first she watched the duck. He walked down to the water and kept on walking in the water. His bright feathered body stayed on top and floated away as smoothly as a sailboat in the wind. He was swimming. Jean Ellen tried the very same thing, but she didn't swim. Her feet stayed on the bottom of the pond and squished in the mud. Her head stuck out of the water. She was surprised to find the duck couldn't do she couldn't do what a little duck could do. Jean Ellen watched the frog swim. He stretched his front and back legs and gave a big jump. And then he went bouncing along under the water and on the water as though it was the best fun in the world. Jean Ellen tried the very same thing. Plop! There she was, right back on the bottom of the pond, with her head sticking out and the mud oozing between her toes. A big drop of water clung to her nose. Jean Ellen decided to take a lesson from the fish. What could swim better than a fish? She put her arms and legs close to her body. She pointed her toes and pointed her nose and went into the water. Splash! She sank to the bottom again. This time she bobbed up with a mouthful of pond water that tasted like cold spinach. And then she spotted a turtle floating gently on the water, his legs moving slowly, carrying him anywhere he wanted to go. Now that looked easier. It wasn't. Jean Ellen sank, glub. She saw her long hair wave in the water like tall grass in the wind. Her dog Bingo went into the water with his head held up so he wouldn't get a whisker wet. He pointed his nose to the shore and moved his legs very fast. Now, surely Jean Ellen could do this. She almost did, but she couldn't move her arms and legs fast enough to hold her up. She looked like a girl punching and kicking in the water. She didn't go anywhere except down. Jean Ellen was very wet, very muddy, and very tired. She was angry with the water for letting her sink. She was angry with the duck and the frog, the fish, the turtle, and the dog because they could swim and she couldn't. Jean Ellen left the pond and went to see a lifeguard at the swimming pool in the park. "I can't swim like a duck or a frog or a fish or a turtle or a dog," she said. "I've tried." "Well, why don't you swim the way people do?" asked the lifeguard. "Well, I don't know how," said Jean Ellen. "Well, I'll teach you," said the lifeguard. Boys and girls do not swim like their animal friends. They don't have webbed feet or a tail. They don't have gills or 4 legs or feathers. They can't breathe in the water. They breathe air. They have to learn to swim their own way. Jean Ellen began to learn. First, she put her head down in the water, holding her breath, and then she blew lots of bubbles. She learned how to turn her head to take a breath of air and to put her face in the water to let the air out. Then she learned to hold her legs together without bending her knees and to kick and splash water high up into the air. She felt like a whale with a water spout. Every day, Jean Ellen went to the swimming pool and learned some more. The lifeguard showed her how to use her arms in the water to get somewhere, and then he showed her how to scoop the water back with her hands, and he showed her many things. She practiced very hard. One day, Jean Ellen swam all the way across the pool without touching the bottom. Oh, she liked it. She felt wonderful. She felt safe and cool and strong and special. She loved the water, and it loved her back. It splashed her playfully. It held her up and carried her around and never let her down. When she opened her eyes under the water, she could see the beautiful patterns of greens, yellows, and blues where the sunlight was trying to get in. She could see the legs of people standing in the pool, all the funny legs. She could see the bubbles fizzing around herself and feel the smoothness, the friendliness of the water. Now you know what you can do in the water, said the lifeguard. Jean Ellen went down to the pond and had a swimming race with the duck, the frog, the fish, the turtle, and the dog. Now, who do you think won? No, the frog. The frog saw a delicious bug on the other side of the pond and swam extra fast to catch it before it flew away. But Jean Ellen didn't care that she hadn't won. She could swim, just the way people do. And that, boys and girls, is the story of Jean Ellen Learns to Swim. And now stay tuned, and we'll be back in just a moment to show you books from the shelves of your public library. Boys and girls, you know tomorrow is a very special day. Yes, it's Father's Day, and I hope you've already bought your father a Father's Day present, but if you haven't, you can make him a card with your crayons and your paper, and you can just design a very beautiful personal card for him. But be sure and do something if you only just say, "I love you, Daddy." Our bookshelf this morning is made up of books all about fathers, and the very first one is entitled Hooray for Father's Day. And this is a delightful picture book, and you can see we have wonderful illustrations all the way. And this is all about the Mule family and how they celebrated Father's Day. Hooray for Father's Day. Our next book is entitled A Father Reads to His Children. And this is a whole book of wonderful stories all the way through, as you can see, and also some beautiful poetry at the end. Yes, this is the book entitled A Father Reads to His Children. Our next book is a delightful picture story. It's entitled Always My Dad. And inside you can see lovely colored illustrations and a beautiful story. Yes, this is the book entitled Always My Dad. The next book is another picture story, and it is My Dad the Magnificent. And you can see these little boys here, and inside we have a very good story. As you can see, lovely illustrations, and there is Dad, and what is he doing? Washing the car, but he has a good helper there. Yes, this is the story, My Dad, the Magnificent. Our next book has a funny title, I think. It's entitled, Daddy Makes the Best Spaghetti. And you can see they've written the title in spaghetti. And inside, it's a very short book, and you can see all the way through. Very little reading, but very pretty pictures. Yes, this is the story of Daddy Makes the Best Spaghetti. And last of all, I'd like to show you this book entitled Father and Son. And you can see they're having a delightful time flying kites together. And inside, you can see very nice illustrations. This book is entitled Father and Son. Be sure, boys and girls, to visit your public library sometime during this next week and check out some very good books. You know, we have 9 libraries in our Craven-Pamlico Carteret Regional Library System, and they all have books just waiting for you to check them out. So use your library card next week and check out some very good books. And now stay tuned, and we'll be back with another story in just a moment. And now, boys and girls, get ready to listen to the story of the baby raccoon. Father Raccoon sat on the river bank fishing. "What can I do?" asked baby raccoon. "Well, just play with your wagon," said Father Raccoon. "I don't want to play," said baby raccoon. "I want to fish." "You're too little to fish," said Father Raccoon. "Pile some little sticks in your wagon and carry them home. When I catch enough fish, we can build a fire. Then Mother Raccoon can cook the fish for our dinner." "Oh, all right," said baby raccoon, and he began picking up little sticks and piling them in his wagon. And soon the wagon was full. Baby raccoon started home, pulling the wagon behind him. Pretty soon he met little muskrat. My, said little muskrat, "are you going to play with all those little sticks?" "I'm not going to play with any of them," said baby raccoon. "I'm taking them home so we can build a fire. Then my mother can cook the fish my father is going to catch." "If I had some little sticks like those," said little muskrat, "I could make my nest in the riverbank much, much stronger." "Well, take some," said baby raccoon. "We won't need all these for our fire." "Thank you," said little muskrat, and he took an armful of sticks. Baby raccoon started home again, pulling the wagon behind him. Pretty soon he met little porcupine. My, said little porcupine, "are you going to eat all of those little sticks?" "Well, I'm not going to eat any of them," said baby raccoon. "I'm taking them home to build a fire. Then my mother can cook the fish my father catches." "The tender bark is just like candy to a porcupine," said little porcupine eagerly. "Well, take some," said baby raccoon. "We won't need all these sticks for our fire." "Thank you," said little porcupine, and he took an armful of sticks. Baby raccoon started home again, pulling the wagon behind him, and pretty soon he met little beaver. My, said little beaver, "I've been hunting little sticks like those to build a dam." "Well, we're going to build a fire with them," said baby raccoon. "Then we can cook the fish my father catches. But we won't need all of these. Take some." "Thank you," said little beaver, and he took an armful of sticks. Baby Raccoon started home again, pulling the wagon behind him. "Look at the sticks I have, Mother," he said. "We'll build a fire to cook the fish that Daddy catches." Mother Raccoon looked in the wagon. "Well, I don't see any sticks," she said. Baby Raccoon looked in the wagon. He didn't see any sticks either, and then he began to cry. Just then Father Raccoon came home. "What's the matter?" he asked. "I gave little Muskrat and little Porcupine and little Beaver some sticks," cried Baby Raccoon, "and now there aren't any sticks left to build a fire to cook the fish that you caught." "Well," said Father Raccoon, "I'm glad we can't build a fire because I didn't catch any fish." "In that case," said Mother Raccoon, "let's visit Farmer Brown's wheat field. I like wheat just as well as fish. Don't you?" "Even better," said Baby Raccoon. And that, boys and girls, is the story of Baby Raccoon. And now stay tuned, and we'll be back with another story just for you. Now, boys and girls, I'm going to read one of our very favorites. Yes, the story of Cinderella. Once there was a girl who was as good as she was beautiful. She lived with her stepmother and her two stepsisters. Oh, they were cruel to her because she was more beautiful than they. They made her scrub and clean all day long and gave her only rags to wear. At night she slept in the chimney corner. Because she was always covered with ashes, they called her Cinder Wench or Cinderella. One day the king's son announced that he was going to give a ball. Cinderella's two stepsisters were invited, and they began to choose silks and laces for their ball gowns and jewels and feathers for their hair. They talked of nothing else but how fine they would look at the palace ball. "You can fix our hair for us," they said to Cinderella. She fixed their hair in different ways and did her best to make them look beautiful. But no matter how hard she tried, Cinderella still looked more beautiful than they, even in her rags. And this made the stepsisters very angry. "Well, why don't you go to the ball too, Cinderella?" they asked. And the poor girl looked down at her rags and said, "Oh, how I wish I could go." And then they laughed at her. With tears in her eyes, Cinderella watched the stepsisters get into their coach and depart for the ball. "Just the same, I wish I could go," she whispered. And then a voice behind her said, "And so you shall go, my child." And Cinderella turned around, and there stood a lovely lady with a crown on her head. "I am your fairy godmother," she said, "and I shall prepare you for the prince's ball. First, run into the garden and get me the biggest pumpkin you can find." Cinderella ran into the garden and brought back the pumpkin, and the fairy waved her wand over the pumpkin, and it changed instantly into a splendid red coach. "And now we need 6 horses," said the fairy godmother. "Run and fetch the mousetrap." Cinderella brought the mousetrap, and there were 6 lively little mice in the trap. The fairy waved her wand, and the mice became 6 prancing horses. "Now we need a coachman," said the fairy. "Bring the rat trap." And Cinderella brought the rat trap with one big rat sitting on it. And the fairy waved her wand, and the rat became a coachman with a coachman's hat and plume on his head. And he jumped up on the coach and took the reins in his hands. We need footmen too," said the fairy. 6 will do. Run and fetch 6 green lizards." And Cinderella brought back the lizards, and the fairy waved her wand, and immediately there were 6 footmen dressed in purple livery, trimmed with gold. "There," said the fairy, "are you happy now?" "But my clothes," said Cinderella, looking down at her rags. The fairy godmother laughed gently and touched Cinderella with her wand. Cinderella's rags fell off, and she was dressed in a magnificent ball gown of golden silk. There were diamonds in her hair, and on her feet twinkled two lovely little glass slippers. "And now off to the ball," said the fairy. "But you must remember that the magic ends at midnight. You must be home at 12 o'clock, or you will find yourself again in rags." Cinderella promised to be back at midnight and rode off to the ball. When Cinderella arrived at the ball, everyone whispered, "What a beautiful princess! I wonder who she is." Even the two stepsisters did not recognize Cinderella. Oh, they were very envious. "The prince dances with no one but her," they said to each other. Indeed, Cinderella and the prince were the handsomest couple on the dance floor, and the prince never left Cinderella's side. When supper was served, he picked out the choicest fruits and cakes for her. He took Cinderella by the hand and led her to the king and the queen and told them that he loved her. Oh, Cinderella was so happy that she quite forgot about the time. Suddenly, she heard the clock strike the first note of 12 midnight, and quickly she curtsied to the prince and then fled from the room and out of the castle. She hurried down the marble steps to her coach. But just as she was about to step into the coach, the last note of 12 sounded. The coach vanished before her eyes, and there on the ground lay a pumpkin. The rat and mice scurried off, and the lizards crawled away in the dust. Cinderella stood there, dressed in rags again. The lovely little glass slippers were all that remained. But Cinderella had lost one of the slippers on the marble steps when she hurried down. She limped home on the other slipper and reached the chimney corner before her stepsisters returned. Now the next morning, everyone was awakened by the sound of a bugle. A messenger from the palace called out the news that the prince had found a glass slipper. He was going to take it to every house in the kingdom until he found its owner. When he found the girl, she would become his bride. All the young ladies in the kingdom were excited. They hurried to put on their best dresses for the prince's visit. But Cinderella had nothing to wear but her rags. The prince went to every house looking for the beautiful girl, and at last he came to Cinderella's house. Cinderella's stepsisters pushed her aside in their hurry to try on the slipper. "I think it will fit me," said the older girl, but she could not even squeeze her toes into the tiny slipper. The younger sister had no better luck. "Let me try," said Cinderella. "You," cried the stepsisters, "go back to your cinders where you belong." But the prince looked at her and saw Cinderella's lovely face, and he knew that he had seen it before. "Let me try." Cinderella slipped her foot into the glass slipper easily, and then, to everyone's amazement, she drew the other slipper out of her apron pocket. At that moment, the fairy godmother appeared, and with her wand touched Cinderella, and there she stood, dressed again in the splendid ball gown. The prince gazed at her with joy and knelt down at her feet. "This is my own true bride." Oh, a great wedding feast was held. Cinderella was so happy that she forgave her stepsisters. She took them to live with her at the palace, where they married 2 lords. And you know, boys and girls, Cinderella and the prince lived happily ever after. And that, boys and girls, is the old story of Cinderella. And now I have time enough to remind you to be sure and give your father a very extra hug and tell him Happy Father's Day tomorrow. Until next Saturday morning, this is Eleanor Hawkins saying bye-bye for Telestory Time.